Here it is, November's voted thematic list build. Thank you all for placing your votes. Although, isn't it strange that if there are any Space Marines of any type up for selection, they win? What's the deal with that? That said, the Minotaurs aren't a terrible pick. For not being a first founding chapter, they have a well-defined character and place in the lore. Plus, the list I've got is pretty good. This one is for a chapter shrouded in mystery and rumor. A chapter capable of ripping through any foe which dares stand against it. A thematic list build for the Minotaurs. The Minotaurs are a Forge World chapter which has recommended successor rules as Imperial Fists using the traits Stalwart and Duelists. Stalwart gives you a defensive layer via a baby transhuman, though it's worth noting that this kind of mechanic is generally more valuable on units of lower toughness, as those are the units which are more likely to have their toughness doubled and in turn be wounded on 2s. And Duelist will allow the Minotaurs to punch above their weight class through auto-wounding on hit rolls of 6 in melee. It's a powerful mechanic, as it's circumventing step 2 of the attack sequence. Just look at the Leagues of Votann for reference. Mind you, this is on 6s instead of 4s, and only in melee, and only against enemy infantry or biker targets, but it's still an efficiency boosting mechanism. Being tied to Imperial Fists isn't a great boon. Currently, they have the worst Space Marine toolkit competitively speaking. Its doctrine will boost your heavy weapons damage, though only against vehicles, and only for weapons of high strength, and only for 1 round. And if you go first and the enemy vehicles are obscured, well, it's a failing of design to say the least. Could GW fack it? Yeah, but it's been this way for years. It's the tried and true GW business model. Neglect the factions consumers have bought into and labored over so they can be later sold rules which are functionally fair. And they can feel grateful for it. But I digress. Regarding the thematic objectives of the list, they are Malign Intensity, the style of list that is geared for kill objectives rather than performing actions or occupying all corners of the board. And Early Adopters. My most recent narrative exposure to the Minotaurs has been in the novel Regent's Shadow, where shortly after Guilliman leaves Terra to begin the Indomitus Crusade and spread Primaris to the Adeptus Astartes, the Minotaurs arrive on Terra with a full complement of Primaris Marines, which draws some interesting questions around the connecting ties the Minotaurs hold. Now, let's head over to the list breakdown. The list is structured as a battalion. Let's begin with the core of this list, the troops. Taking up 2 troop slots are 2 units of Assault Intercessors. These units are here to serve as actionable units to engage the enemy and flip objectives. The Sergeants have been given power swords because their average strength and high AP pair well with the Duelist's successor tactic. Plus, they evoke a Greek aesthetic, especially so if you use Gladius-styled power swords. Taking up 2 more troop slots are 2 units of Incursors. Their role is similar to that of the Intercessors, only they hit a little softer, but their forward deploying abilities will allow them to apply pressure earlier, or control critical zones from the jump, which in either case can be followed up by the Intercessors. Hanging about with the troops is the Judiciar. This angry man fits well with the Minotaur's demeanor, and is here to present a melee deterrent to your enemies. 2 command points have been spent on him for a trait and relic. The Hand of Dorn is taken to essentially provide free CP. At worst you break even, and at best you're up 2 command points. His relic choice is a simple mastercrafted weapon, elevating his Executioner Relic Blade to a hefty 3 damage. With the OBSEC core of the list defined, we can move up to the first skirmishing node. Taking up 2 fast attack slots are 2 units of Outriders. The bikes are fast actionable units for shock assaults. Granted, they won't be able to advance and charge, but with their movement they ought to be able to position for a turn 2 charge, while also providing the necessary screen for the Chaplain. The Chaplain has been taken in the popular Slaplin format. He's a Master of Sanctity, so he can cast 2 prayers, which have been taken as the Mantra of Strength to make him hit harder, and the Canticle of Hate, which he can use to buff core and character charge, pilot, and consolidate distances. 2 command points have been spent on him to give him a trait and a relic. the Imperium Sword and the Benediction of Fury respectively, both of which further boost his offensive output, which makes him hit like a brick shithouse. Under Mantra of Strength, he will have 7 attacks on the charge, hitting on 2s at Strength 8, AP 2 dealing 4 damage, with wound rolls of 6 dealing mortal wounds in addition to the normal damage, not to mention the auto-wounding efficiency gained from duelists. The last unit of this fast attack node is a Storm Speeder Hammerstrike, a fast-moving vehicle with fly, which has the tools to take advantage of the Imperial Fist's Doctrine bonus, Legacy of Dorn. The second node is slower, but also tankier. Taking 2 elite slots are 2 Contemptor Dreadnoughts loaded up identically with multi-meltas. In addition to the efficiency, resiliency, and utility these Dreadnoughts bring, they also serve as an escort for the Minotaurs character Dreadnought, Hecaton Iacos. What Iacos brings over the standard Contemptor Dreadnought is a 2-up weapon skill and ballistic skill, 1 extra attack, a 4-up invulnerable instead of a 5-up, and an ability to perform mortal wounds on the charge, all for 10 points more, though the heavy plasma cannon he's locked to is somewhat worse than the multi-melta. But regardless, he will look great on the table next to 2 Contemptors, as the Minotaurs are famed for their above-average capacity to field Contemptor Dreadnoughts. Moving on, providing fire support are 2 Gladiator Lancers, armed with Lancer Laser Destroyers, Iron Hail Heavy Stubbers, Icarus Rocket Pods, and Auto Launchers. The Lancer Laser Destroyers, with their innate +1 to hit, definitely pack a punch when they connect, all the more so when benefiting from the Legacy of Dorn Doctrine bonus. Use these tanks to play the line of sight game, as they hunt after enemy vehicles and monsters. And the last unit of the list, and the unit which will be serving as the Warlord, is the Chapter Master of the Minotaurs, Asterion Moloch. It's honestly such a treat when your chapter has a big bad Commander-in-Chief unit, and Moloch has the tools you would expect. He's got Terminator armor, 7 wounds, and 6 attacks on the charge. His sole weapon is the Black Spear, which fires an Assault 1 Last Fusil, and swings like a Strength 6 Thunderhammer with better AP, that isn't unwieldy. He's got a shield that gives him a 4-up Feel No Pain to mortal wounds, and his unique ability gives Khorran characters within 6 inches rerolls for their charges. His only shortcoming is his Warlord trait. Due to the state the Forge World rules are in, the Minotaurs are to be played as Imperial Fists, which is fine enough. But if you look at the Imperial Fist rules, Moloch is unaccounted for in the named character Warlord trait specifications. And so, he's stuck with the ultra-lame basic rulebook +1 to leadership Warlord trait. And so, yet again, the critique which I raised in the review segment has reared its ugly head. But I will only yield so much from my theme. Moloch must be the Warlord. However, you got a few options. Run Moloch as your Warlord, not spending CP to give him a trait as I have done here. Run the Chaplain as the Warlord, rationalizing Moloch conceded command to the Chaplain due to some lame excuse like a training exercise. Or House Rule it. Pay the CP and give him a trait. From the list available, I would recommend Stubborn Heroism. And that's the list, locking in at an even 2,000 points, providing between 3 and 5 command points depending on how the Hand of Dorn Warlord trait resolves. Aside from my gripes with the state of the Imperial Fist rules and the Minotaur's characters' interactions with them, I think the list meets the thematic goals well enough, as it's definitely heavy aggro, and it is heavy Primaris, plus the Hecaton trio speaks to the Minotaur's reputation, while even including a few named characters. And despite the problems I find with vehicles in the game, which is a topic for another video, I quite like the Lancers in the list. Not only do they uniquely deal damage from afar, but they bring the aesthetic variety which makes an army in Warhammer 40k feel like an army. And I also find the Gladiator Lancers are named in such a way that almost makes them feel like they were made for the Minotaurs. That's a wrap on this Minotaurs thematic list build. Thanks for watching, and a special thanks to my patrons, Julius Maximus, as well as the others who help keep the dream alive. As for the future of the thematic list build series, well, I'm skipping a community poll for a December thematic list build, as there are other videos I want to get done, and the holiday season makes it harder to get a thematic list build done at the end of the month. But as for going forward in the new year, I think some changes are due. This year saw shifting the selection mechanism to one based on suggestion, and then one based on votes in an effort to better satisfy the community's desires. But looking back, more often than not, Space Marines seem to be what gets selected. And after giving it some thought, I think it's best to determine the factions of focus myself, and avoid slipping into the common trap for content creators that is audience capture. So going forward, I'll determine what factions get list builds based on what I find interesting, where I think variety is due, or what's topical, but of course, feel free to continue requesting what you would like to see in the comments. Bonus points if there is a rationale or a theme tied to it, which leads into the standard outro well enough. So, if you have any questions, comments, or requests for factions which you would like to see featured in this series, please feel free to drop them down below. Anyways, there are buttons for liking, sharing, and subscribing, so press the buttons you want to press, and I'll catch you in the next one.